This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Fitter, happier, more productive, comfortable, not drinking too much, regular exercise at the gym, 3 days a week, getting on better with your associate employee contemporaries, at ease, eating no more microwave dinners and saturated fats, a patient better driver, a safer car.
That is, of course, Radiohead from OK Computer, the dystopian anthem of the late 90s, with the song Fitter, Happier. And I wanted to play that for you just as a little reminder of what none of us want to do. This time of year, we are now at the new year. Happy New Year, everyone. I think we can feel really compelled to make these kinds of resolutions and think about the changes that we want to make in our lives, and which are all good things, but doing so in a way that is A, unrealistic, B, unproductive, does not lead to change, and C, worst of all, can make you feel really bad about yourself when you think about all of your failures and all the things that you're not doing quite right and all the ways in which you could be better. It's enough to make you want to eat the whole box of donuts, isn't it? And just give up. So today on the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast, I am putting on my life coach hat, and I'm going to help you. I like doing for the new year a kind of activity with my listeners that will actually give you some skills and strategies to create some positive change in your life and not fall victim to those unhelpful mindsets that are being trumpeted at this time of year that are only going to and end up in disappointment. You deserve more than that. So that's what we're doing today on the show. And hey, hi, if this is your first time listening, welcome. I'm glad that you found us. I, again, am Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. I am the founder and clinical director of Growing Self Counseling and Coaching. And my background, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also a licensed psychologist, and I'm a board certified life coach. And I started doing the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast several years ago now. I was actually just scrolling back on iTunes not too long ago. We have over 100 episodes of this podcast now, which is amazing. But I started it just as a way of adding value to people's lives, whether or not they become our counseling or coaching clients. And one of the things that I've really just loved over the years, and even more and more so recently, are all of the questions and level of engagement that you guys, my beloved listeners, are having with this show. It's just been so much fun. And so thank you very much for all of your kind words. It means a lot to me knowing that this podcast has been helpful to you. And I also really appreciate all of your questions. I hang on to all of them. I read all of them, and I use them to design, upcoming episodes of the podcast, because I really do want this to be helpful to you. We've had a lot of questions coming through on our blog, which has been super fun, and also a lot on Facebook, you guys. And hey, if you have not yet become part of this conversation, jump in. You can come to our website, growingself.com, come to our blog and podcast page. You'll see an article for this here podcast episode, and there may be questions or comments that you can get involved in, and also others, and also through Facebook. Facebook.com/Dr. Lisa Bobby. I dropped the official Marie for the sake of brevity on my Facebook page. So anyway, get in touch with us, get involved, and thanks for listening. Oh, lastly, if you enjoy the podcast, if you get something out of it, say so wherever you get it. So iTunes, Stitcher, whatever app you like, because you're rating the podcast, reviewing the podcast, it makes it more likely that somebody else will stumble upon it. And that is literally the only thing that we do to promote this podcast, is just word of mouth. So thank you if you have reviewed the podcast, and thank you in advance if that is still ahead of you. Thank you on behalf of people who might not have heard it yet. So anyway, so let's jump in to our topic at hand, because I don't want to go on and on about the dangers of resolutions. I will say that it's great to have goals, and it's great to have hopes for your life and positive intentions. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I also hear a lot these days about SMART goals, and that's also good too. If you have a goal for yourself and want it to be on a timeline and breaking it down into the steps. But the thing that I have realized over several decades now of being a person, but also a long time now as both a therapist and a life coach, I'm the people that people get involved with when they want to make change in their lives. And that's really the impetus for everyone who comes into life coaching and therapy, is the sense that something in my life is not working the way that I want it to. And I have exhausted all of the things that I know how to do in order to change that. So here I am, life coach / therapist. What do we do next? And because I have walked through this with so many people, so many times, I have a very clear sense of what actually works when the goal is creating a life change. And I will just add as an aside, there is also oftentimes quite a bit of pre-work that needs to be done before the actual change event is able to happen. Because many times people who come into counseling and life coaching are not entirely clear about exactly what the cause of the unwanted outcomes are. And so it can oftentimes take a lot of just combing through and listening to stories, listening for patterns, talking about the details, looking at things systemically for people to arrive at the things that they actually do need to change or have the power to change. So just for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to skip over that whole part and assume that you have a good sense of what actually does need to change. But I just wanted to say that out loud because sometimes, and I think one of the main culprits for resolutions that don't work out the way that you want them to, is that many people who make resolutions or have goals do not yet have a full understanding of what they have been doing or participating in that has led to the current outcome that they're currently experiencing. Sometimes people think it's one thing, but then over the course of counseling or coaching, when we really put everything under a microscope and start asking hard questions, there can be insight and kind of new information that changes the nature of the air quote problem. And then when people have that clarity, they can target that actual issue as opposed to chasing after things that may seem like the obvious solution, but aren't actually what's motivating it. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to just say that out loud. And again, I just wanted to say that because I don't want you to feel bad about yourself if you try some of the things that I'm talking about today and for whatever reason struggle to implement what I'm going to be sharing with you. If that happens, that is a great indication that there may be something else going on a little bit deeper, not like pathology or issues, but unconscious things that have not yet come to the surface, that once they do and you have a handle on that, the actual change process will be much easier for you. So don't beat yourself up yet if you have just not yet had the opportunity to do that work. But if you have, and if you have a clear sense of what you would like to change, today I'm excited to offer you some new ideas that I think are just going to be much more successful for you. So when it comes to making change, the thing that doesn't work, resolutions doesn't work, but also even like motivation. Some people think if I was just more motivated, I would be able to make these changes. And the truth is, people, that motivation ebbs and flows on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. And so motivation is helpful to get started and yes, to reconnect with motivation, but we do not rely on motivation to help us make change because that's like, it's like a tide and you don't want to build a house where the tide comes in and out, right? And so do not attach your success to motivation. And also planning. Planning is helpful when it comes to making change, and plans also are it can be fragile because life happens. And what they say about the best laid plans, right? Because oftentimes plans can be more rigid than our lives actually allow for. And then when the plan that they created can't withstand the ups and downs of daily whatever, then again, people get discouraged and abandon those plans. And so what we need is something that is simple, something that is flexible, and something that does not require a lot of motivation to actually make those changes and move forward. And so what we know from research, and if you guys have ever listened to this podcast, you know that I am a card-carrying nerd. Oh my God, I don't know how I got sucked into doing this, but I was messing around online the other day, and the Harry Potter house sorting hat quiz came up, which I took because I don't even know why. And I thought maybe I was a Hufflepuff. I'm actually a Ravenclaw, which makes a lot of sense given my aptitude for the nerdy details and my love of research. So anyway, going back to that research, what we know is that when people are able to create change, it's because they have this understanding of the way that our brains actually work. And they can use that knowledge combined with an understanding of the way real, big life changes occur. Because when you have those two ingredients, you have this secret recipe to hack your way to success that is almost inevitable. It is inevitable that you succeed in creating changes when you know what to do. And this process, it might sound a little complicated, but it's actually not complicated at all. It depends on finding one very solid keystone habit. So let's first start here by talking a little bit about what I mean by a habit. A habit is a behavior or activity that you routinely do every day, possibly multiple times a day, and so often that you begin to do it unconsciously. It just feels like what you do. It feels normal. It feels unconscious. You just do it. A powerful habit becomes so ingrained in you that it simply feels hardwired. Cover your mouth when you cough. You put your right sock on first without thinking about it. The way you answer the phone, you don't think about these things. And yet they are habits. They're things that you do over and over again, most of the time unconsciously. And it is also true that everything from the way our brains are literally wired, because our brains are plastic and our brains develop neural pathways in response to the things we do every day, to the things we think all the time. What is habitual, it feels almost like you have to do it. It feels like a compulsion to do it because you have trained your brain over and over and over and over again, times a zillion, to do these same things. And so when you're able to find a habit, a keystone habit to change, and make that the new normal, so many other things fall into place automatically. And you will have a shocking level of success at creating change without really trying that hard if you have the one good keystone habit. Because when you think of it, behaviorists, I am not necessarily a behaviorist, but behaviorists can get pretty scary about this. They will say that our entire lives are not as much in our control, in our willful control as we think they are, because we have so many things that we do on autopilot without thinking about it, and that our entire lives, the arc of our life, the outcome of our life on a big picture is really just about the tiny micro habits that we do every day without thinking about them, that are so subconscious. When you think about it, your life, all of our lives, my life, is simply the product of everything that you've done up to this point. And if you are having a happy life where things are working out for you, it means that you have established and routinely practice habits that have created and sustained that happy outcome. And if things are feeling hard, there are often other habits that are contributing to that. But really, it goes into what we're doing, not even day by day, but hour by hour, moment by moment. Those tiny little micro choices result in being 50 pounds overweight or not, having savings in the bank or not, the quality of our relationships, the way we react to people. Those are all outcomes of what we habitually do. Now, that's not to say that there aren't big macro decisions that can certainly impact our lives. Where you go to school or whether you go to school, who you marry, if you move to a certain location or take a certain job, those are circumstances that have the potential to influence the outcomes of our lives. But even in all of those situations, there are positive opportunities and pitfalls in every job, in every community, in every college major, and in every relationship. And it's really what you do with those circumstances in terms of your daily habits that has much greater impact on those outcomes than the circumstances themselves. It might not feel like you always have a ton of control, but when you get very granular around what are your daily habits and not just doing things subconsciously, but making it a point to be very mindful of what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What do I do every day that I don't even think about? And what is the outcome of these tiny choices / habits? That's when you start to have a lot more control over the way that things work for you. And so going back to this resolution or having the big changes that you want to make in your life, when you think about it, we often say, I want to save money, or I want to lose weight, or I want to have a better relationship, or expand my social circle, or keep my house clean. All of these are good, legitimate, fantastic hopes for yourself, but they will really remain hopes until you understand and learn how to utilize these habits that are currently creating the reality that you're experiencing, and then swap them out for the ones that will allow you to create the life that you want. Again, hour by hour, day by day. And in order to do that, easiest way is to find one extremely powerful keystone habit. A keystone habit is a habit that is connected to many other habits and routines and things in your life, because it can be really overwhelming when we shine the light of truth and self-awareness on what your habits currently are, maybe things that aren't working. I know that when I sit down and think about all of my personal habits that I would need to change in order to create some of the results that I would like, it's wow. Even if you just had one goal, that requires a number of very small daily habits to make that happen. And that can be discouraging. It sort of feels exhausting when you break it all down, and that feels tiring and it feels overwhelming and it's ugh. But when you find a keystone habit, things start to fall into place. And let me define keystone habit. Okay, so a keystone habit is a singular habit that you find that is connected to many other things. So, for example, if you were to focus on one daily habit and commit yourself to this one daily keystone habit of making all of your, healthy-ish food at home, that's the only thing that you focus on. To prepare your own food, to make it healthy, and to do it at home. Many other things fall into place. So, for example, you will have to plan out your meals, put together a shopping list, because it takes a fair amount of time to do all of your cooking. So that would probably require some preparing meals in advance. You're taking your lunches to work with you. You're having little healthy snacks there available. And naturally, things start falling into place when you're being mindful about what you want to eat for the week. Grocery lists and eating at home is also going to save you money. You might have people over to host lunches or dinner parties instead of going out. And also, it can ripple out into other different things. You're spending time at home, so you have more time to tidy up and your kitchen is more organized. You feel a sense of satisfaction and control over your food because you're doing this one thing every day, which then leads itself more easily do other things like having a better mood because you're eating better, getting to sleep earlier because you are not going out for takeout and having all kinds of weird chemical additives in your food, so you're sleeping better. You have more energy, you have a better mood, it's easier to do little things like exercise. I could go on and on, but so this one keystone habit has a ripple effect into many other positive things. And what starts to happen is that it turns into a habit loop. You're not like willfully changing all of these associated habits, but that one keystone habit of preparing healthy meals at home creates these changes in many other areas of your life where you have other kind of positive byproducts now supporting that original. For example, when you are eating your homemade salad at work for lunch every day and feeling good about that, and also as a byproduct, feeling more energized and thinking, you know what, this salad is good and I'm on track and I feel good about that, I should go on a walk. You go on a walk, maybe you invite a coworker, which also starts to add support for the positive changes that you're making. And it becomes self-sustaining and easier to repeat, which is at the core of developing any habit, is repetition and repetition. But a good keystone habit that turns into a loop, it's not like you're white knuckling it every day because you have a lot of wind at your back when you have all of these positive forces now conspiring to help you continue with this one really positive habit. Also, a good keystone habit often includes habit stacking. So when you have that solid keystone habit that you're committed to, habit stacking naturally occurs. So it's clustering together several positive habits that become stronger than if you were to do any one of them singularly on its own. So for example, if you're in that routine of making all of your meals at home, healthy meals at home, you naturally get into a habit or routine of meal planning, shopping, food prepping, and it also turns into I reorder my refrigerator and clean out my cabinets a little bit when I do my meal planning and grocery shopping and come home with all the bags. Budgeting your money, it becomes stacked in with that because food costs are, for most people, the biggest wild card in their monthly budget. And so when we're being mindful and preparing things in advance, that kind of gets worked in too. And we also have to plan out your time for the week when you're thinking about, okay, so what does Wednesday look like? Okay, so I can use this stuff from Tuesday for Wednesday. And what's going on Wednesday? Oh yeah, there's that yoga class. And maybe I should see if so-and-so wants to come home after yoga and have dinner with me. Whatever. There's all kinds of associated things that begin to stack up and create kind of order and continuity and routine, and like a habit loop that reinforces it, but that the stacked habits just happen automatically when you're really deeply committed to making that one keystone habit. And so a keystone habit can look like all kinds of different things. It does not have to be making all your food at home. It could be having one habit of making and updating your budget every day. And that can also have ripples into many other things. It can go into your lifestyle choices and what you do for fun and the kind of food that you eat and where you eat and the daily habits that you must organize around the singular goal of maintaining and keeping track of a personal budget. Exercising for many people can be a keystone habit. When you have one habit of, say, waking up first thing in the morning and exercising, it has a ripple effect to many other areas of your life. We know that exercise, particularly daily exercise, has a major impact on things like mood, cognition, memory, and having more energy so that you naturally do many other things, not even intentionally, but just as a happy byproduct of having a daily exercise routine that can really create major change in many other areas of your life. So I won't define for you what that keystone habit should be, but I will challenge you to think about it. Is there one thing in your life that you could focus on and make it a habit so that you are committed to doing it day in, day out. Something simple. It will be to your detriment to have it be complicated, but something very simple. This is my habit. This is what I do now. I will do it whether or not I feel motivated to do it. It doesn't depend on some plan for me to do this. It's just simply what I do. And it's one thing as opposed to 87 things. However, over time, you will have more than 87 things popping up all around you as a result. When it comes to establishing and maintaining a keystone habit, it's also, I think, really important to just touch on this idea of how long does it take to form a habit. So going back to your neurobiology, when you have old habits and daily routines in place, anytime that you start focusing on a new habit, you are for a little while breaking new ground in your brain. The analogy that I often like to use is if you have a field, a prairie of waist-high grass, and there is a well-worn path that you always walk down over and over and over and over again, a zillion times a day, and all of a sudden your new habit takes you in a different direction. You are going to have to very consciously and deliberately turn away from that well-worn path and break new ground. You are going to have to walk over with big lifted knees to get through this waist-high prairie grass into a new direction. And you're going to have to do it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, and it is going to take a little while. Over time, what will happen is that there will be a new path through the grass, and there's going to be grass and groundhogs and all kinds of flora and fauna coming up over the old path over time, and then the new path will become more and more clear. But at first, it will require a lot of intention, and I'm going to give you some tips for how to do that most effectively and how to avoid some of the pitfalls. But with regards to actually how long it takes, the research is actually all over the place. I've seen people that say it takes a couple weeks, 21 days, 30 days. I've also seen other research that says it actually takes closer to a year. And probably the truth is that you're going to have to do it very intentionally for a while, few weeks, a month or two. You're going to have to think about it and do it mindfully and make that decision to do it every day. And if you do that very deliberately and carefully over time, it will actually turn into a thing that just feels like what you do, that you really don't have to think about that much. And if you pick that good keystone habit, it's going to have had that ripple effect, and you're going to look around 6 months, 9 months, a year, and think, wow, this is my life. I have a lot of money in the bank, or I am actually 30 pounds lighter, or I have so many friends, or my relationship is going great. Really, the miracle of applied effort over time, even if it's a small effort, a little drip every day, that consistency, that habit, that is the force that carved the Grand Canyon. And it is certainly a force that can create amazing outcomes in your life. Small actions applied consistently every day over long periods of time. That's what this is all about. Nothing really much more fancy or heroic than that. Now, people will also ask me, Life Coach Lisa, what about bad habits? What about those? Because, so I have this keystone habit, but what about all the other things that I'm doing that are actually sabotaging the keystone habit? And you can also apply this same process to AKA bad habits in your life. And again, what we know from research is that quitting a bad habit, like just stopping doing something, is futile at best because there's a vacuum and it's hard to simply stop something. And what is actually much more effective is replacing unwanted habit, let's say, with a wanted habit, a habit that leads to unhappy results with a habit that leads to the results that you want. And for example, if you're in the habit of eating junk food after work, we're going to take away the triggers, right? We're going to prime you for success. And I'll talk about other strategies here in a second. But if you have that one keystone habit of I eat healthy food at home every day, you are replacing that old bad habit with something very new and very concrete and also very doable. Because if you have that bowl of apples sitting on your counter that you see, that's the first thing that you reach for, as opposed to just mindlessly falling into this old habit of wandering through the grocery store and picking up crap that looks good and putting it in your cart, and I'll only have a few bites and I'll throw it away. Whatever you typically do now, that good keystone habit can really change it. Also, again, going back to the power of budgeting, that can be a fantastic keystone habit, because if you have a limited grocery budget, say, that ice cream becomes a luxury, and apples are cheaper, can be cheaper. Well, maybe not apples. I've been at the checkout line before and I'm like, how much am I paying right now for a bag of apples or a bag of grapes? So celery is typically inexpensive. You might want to go for that. Water, certainly. But anyway, so finding a solid one can really help you. Mindfulness. Being committed to practicing mindfulness very intentionally every day can be linked to many other things, including eating, including mood, including cognition, including exercise, including emotional regulation, and managing many of the triggers that might take us down the path of unhappy outcomes. So swapping a bad habit for a positive new keystone habit can really be amazing. Now, let me also just talk to you about some of the things that we know that research has shown that can help you hack yourself into a new habit, especially during those early days when it does feel challenging. Believe it or not, I was actually surprised myself to learn this. One of the biggest factors in whether or not anyone is able to exert what we think of as willpower, right? This sheer force of will that allows us to do certain things, is the amount of glucose that is present in your blood. I'm going to say that again. It's the amount of glucose that you currently have circulating in your blood. And this has been carried out with experiments. People who are put into a situation where they're asked to exert their willpower, if they have just eaten an apple or a cookie or something else that has raised their blood sugar, as compared with a diet drink that might taste similarly sweet but does not actually raise your blood sugar, perform much worse. And so, we think, oh yeah, I should probably eat something before I go to the grocery store so I don't buy all the food. And it's actually not so much about not being hungry as it is having glucose circulating in your blood. So, especially in those early days of changing a habit, make sure that you regularly eat small meals and don't get too hungry or have your blood sugar plummet, because if it does, it's going to be hard to stay on track. I have heard some acolytes of the keto diets where you're really focusing on suppressing your blood sugar. I think that if you're able to sustain that over a period of time, I've heard that cravings satiate, so that it could have also something to do with a fluctuation of glucose in your bloodstream, that if it's usually suppressed, maybe that is also a way of hacking into habits, being able to follow through with habits. So things to think about. Other things, though, that are important to be mindful of are triggers, particularly when we look at bad habits and healthy habits. Triggers and primes are very important players in whether or not you're able to follow through consistently with a new habit. So a trigger for a bad habit may be something like stress, anxiety, being in certain physical locations or social situations, and it may be a good idea to avoid triggers that you can avoid in the early days of establishing a new habit. And also, particularly when it comes to mental and emotional triggers. So I always smoke a cigarette when I get into the car in the morning, so I'm going to start taking the bus to work instead. So when it comes to emotional triggers, they're things that you feel and that are more difficult to rearrange in your life. a strategy that can really help you with that is actually mindfulness skills. And so really very deliberately being aware of what are my triggers when I go to the store with the best intentions of coming home with healthy food and instead come home with the cookies and the ice cream. What are my triggers? What am I thinking about? What am I feeling? What are the stories that I'm telling myself in my head that kind of legitimize this? And being extremely mindful about it. And by mindful, noticing without criticism or judgment, but noticing what is actually going on in my head and in my body at this present moment. And also being able to step into that experience long enough to accept it, notice it without judgment, but also not have to unconsciously react to it either. That is one of the byproducts of a good mindfulness practice. And I could talk a lot more about that, but that is beyond the scope of this particular podcast, maybe in a next one. But that can be a very helpful tool, is really leaning into the feelings as opposed to trying to get away from it. And also, similarly to negative triggers, it's very easy to prime the system to do the things that you want it to do. I made mention of putting the apples in an attractive bowl on the counter, because when you see the apples, even if you're unconsciously aware that you're seeing the apples, you are much more likely to make healthy eating choices. When you keep your workout gear or your workout shoes in your bedroom, where you see them when you wake up in the morning, you're much more likely to actually put them on and go exercise. Small things that you can do to prime keeping a budgeting app front and center on your phone. A lot of people are really not all that complex in some ways. And really, we tend to do what we see or what we hear or what is right in front of us. So if you want to make it much easier to follow through with that Keystone habit, make it very obvious what you're supposed to do with reminders and those hacks to prime yourself into effortlessly doing the habit. For me, I have found personally that my most important Keystone habit is adhering to a daily and weekly routine. My time management habit. Everything else in my life falls into place when I do that. When I don't, it's chaos, and I don't do the things that are most important to me. So when I have calendars all around me, I have my planner that I take with me everywhere that I write things down in, and I spend time figuring out what I'm going to do that day or what I'm going to do that week. That is my Keystone habit. And that's what works for me. But again, I'm sitting here at my desk right now and I have 4 different calendars looking at me because that's how many calendars I need to keep myself on track at any given time. But I don't put the calendars in a drawer where I can't see them. I look at them. They're always in front of me. So it's hard for me not to think, oh yes, I have to do this next, don't I? Also, little just tidbits that will help you. Making realistic plans for yourself instead of unrealistic ones. My personal daily routines, I do not schedule myself in 15-minute increments because that will never happen. I have some things that I need to get done on certain days, and that's more what my plans look like because that is what is realistic for me. And similarly, think about what might be realistic for you in your own life. We're not shooting for perfection is the enemy of habit and of change, because again, when we can't do it perfectly, we can give up. And that's the last thing that you want. That is the worst case scenario, is giving up. Similarly, you are going to go off track with us sometimes, and that is an opportunity to learn, not to throw in the towel. Okay, what didn't work? How do I need to refine my Keystone habit? What is getting in the way of me being able to do this habit every day? Taking a look at that. Also, if you're able to, be able to reward yourself and make it fun. So ideally, your Keystone habit, you will have some kind of intrinsic reward or motivation to keep it going, even if it's a sense of accomplishment or pride, or it is enjoyable. I know, I'm such a nerd. I have more enjoyable days when I am staying on track and getting the things done that I know that I need to get done, because the alternative to that is a lot of stress and anxiety for me, and I don't like feeling that way. So sticking to my plan has rewards all of its own, but certainly if it's things like exercise, you can find lots of different ways to make that fun. Incorporating other people into your Keystone habit is another nice way of being able to get that to stick. And then also, probably the most important thing, and something that so many of us, self included, tend to do subconsciously, is shaming and criticizing ourselves when it doesn't work for some reason, or when we fall off track, or when we don't exercise, like, oh, the day is over, and start berating ourselves. That leads to terrible consequences. Not only does it make you feel badly about yourself, but we also know from research that it's much easier to do positive behaviors when we feel confident, when we feel emotionally safe, when we feel good about ourselves, when we feel empowered. And so instead of beating yourself up if you fall off a little bit, give yourself that friendly pep talk and that's okay. You know what? Messed up. Let's do better next time. What does that need to look like next time? Again, have that growth mindset around it, as opposed to it's ruined now, shaming, sort of, how could you suck at this kind of mindset, because that will always tear down your progress. So I know that's an awful lot of information packed into a little podcast here, but highlights: finding that Keystone habit, making it simple, making it something that you can commit to do every day, and making it something that sort of has this web effect on other areas of your life when you do that really consistently and focus on doing this one thing. And then also being mindful of things that can either pull you off track or keep you on track. So glucose, triggers, what to do with impulsivity. Oh, you know what? We didn't even really talk about that. Sorry. Impulsivity is another thing that can really take you away from a healthy habit, because who doesn't have 27 other ideas in their head of, oh, instead of following my daily routine, I should do this instead. And it seems like a good idea at the time, so I'm going to go do that. Similarly, for food choices, for budgeting, oh, I need this, I want this. So being aware, again, using that mindfulness around what are my impulsive tendencies, using air quote failure of not following through with a habit, it's oftentimes either due to a trigger or an impulsive urge. And so what was that impulse that I just had that made me not do that today? And so what do I need to do to resist that? Or the next time I have that thought in my head, how can I talk myself through that so that I am able to continue through with my Keystone habit the way I intend to? So also rewarding yourself either intrinsically or extrinsically, trying to make it fun, focusing on the positive outcomes of it. And again, just putting your head down and committing to do one simple thing every single day. It feels like a drip. It is not sexy. It's not that exciting. It's not a grand sweeping resolution or some kind of sparkling goal. It's what change actually looks like when you really do make things happen. It's not that exciting, but it works. So I hope that this was helpful to you as a discussion that will really move you forward as you take yourself into the next year. And our musical intro, that Radiohead song, was that sort of crushing, oh my God, of what none of us want, which is this sort of avalanche of all these things that I need to do and be better. So our musical muse for the closing of the show is going to be Mr. Js Bach. Not only was he incredibly talented, he was an amazingly prolific composer. And, you know, honestly, people don't actually know a whole lot about his personality, except that he was devoted to making excellent music every day. He was described as having extremely high priority around craftsmanship. Potentially say that Bach had a keystone habit of making excellent music every day. That was the one thing that he really applied himself to over and over again. Drip. And he did amazing things in his life, and I think you can too. So that's all for now. Enjoy Js Bach on the way out, and I will be back in touch next time with another episode of the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.